There are some places that, even years after you leave them, they seem to stick to you like a bad smell. You might have been there only once and never want to return. And then there are places you QA and get out of your mind, even though you've either never been there at all. A house in Bavaria, Germany, is one such place. In April of 1922, police were called to the farmhouse known as Hinterkaifeck, or Back on the Hill. They had received a call from a local telling them that he hadn't seen anyone from the Gruber family for several days, and he was worried because the mail was piling up. The caller went to the house to check on them, and when no one answered his knock, he let himself in to find 6 people brutally murdered in the most heinous ways imaginable. And to this day, we don't know who did it. Or we may never know exactly what happened at the Gruber family farm that night, but thankfully we have records. Andreas Gabriel was born in 1870 and purchased the family farm in 1911. He lived there with his wife, Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and their respective children from previous relationships, 19-year-old Casper, 17-year-old Cecilia, also known as Cecilia, 14-year-old Joseph, and 11-year-old Magdalena. As far as we know, the family kept to themselves and were well liked in the community. There was nothing about them that would make them enemies. On March, a coachman who worked for the family traveled to a nearby village to do some shopping. He returned later that evening, just before dark, to find a dead pig in the yard. This wasn't too strange. Farm animals do die. But the coachman noticed something else strange: a bicycle outside the house. One of the children had gone to stay at a friend's house for a few days, and they always took their bike with them. When he asked Andreas about it, he shrugged. The next day, the family went to confession at the local church. It was Easter Sunday. The priest arrived at the farmhouse at around 1 p.m. for an afternoon confession. But no one was home except for Joseph and Magdalena. He confessed to both of them and sent them off to fetch their mother. When the priest heard their confession, he sent them back to tell their father that he should come and confess as soon as possible. At around 3 p.m., Andreas came into the small chapel and confessed. Then he left, and the priest continued with his work. He was still in the house when the coachman arrived. And again, Andreas shrugged when asked about the bike. Later that night, after the priest left, Andreas, his son Joseph, and the coachman went into the village for a drink at the Golden Crown Inn. They drank heavily, leaving Casper and Cecilia in charge of looking after their parents. At around 10 p.m., Andreas left to return home, but the others stayed behind. When they eventually left the pub, it was to find their farmhouse empty and their parents missing. The innkeeper drove them home in his cart, but there was still no sign of Andreas. They let themselves in and found him lying dead on the floor with a large wound to his head. The others were found dead in similar fashion, their heads smashed open like eggs. When the police arrived the following morning, they were baffled. Who could have done such a thing and why? There were no signs of a struggle. The killer had taken their time. Each body was posed almost as if the killer wanted the bodies to be found like that. Some believe that perhaps a traveling circus was responsible, but no one saw any circuses in the area at the time, and none of the bodies were ever identified. As the investigation dragged on, rumors began to spread that the killings were actually the work of vampires. The legend goes that in the early 1900s, 3 farmers from the region had gone to the police, claiming that their family members were vampires. It was never proven, but many believe that these very same ghouls were responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders. But there is one more twist. In 2019, scientists examined the exhumed bodies of 2 of the victims and found evidence that they had been poisoned with arsenic. This may mean that the killings were actually the work of a jealous lover or someone in the family, but we will probably never know. Now watch Most Evil Serial Killers of All Time, or check out